The great royal festival of Arua had ended, and the last echoes of the celebration were being swallowed by the night. In the central clearing, the air still thrummed with excitement, but the focus had narrowed to a single point: young Tund. The villagers surrounded him, their voices a warm, roaring river of praise, their hands patting his shoulders in a rhythm of pure admiration. He stood with his head bowed, not in pride, but in a humility that seemed to radiate from him like warmth from a hearth. His hands, which had moments before flown across his goatskin drum with such speed and grace, now hung quietly at his sides. From the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing, his master, Okoro, watched. A smile was fixed upon Okoro's face, a careful mask carved from a lifetime of pride, but his eyes, had anyone cared to look, held a different, darker truth. They were the eyes of a man, watching his own dream being lived by another. They burned with a low, green, flickering fire. He was the greater drummer, the one with more skill and experience, he thought, his heart a frantic, jealous rhythm. Why did this boy, this mere apprentice who still fumbled with the most complex patterns, receive such honor? The king, ancient and wise, his beard as white as the moon, raised his gnarled hands for silence. His voice, though weathered by seasons, carried across the hushed crowd like a soft wind. Tomorrow, he declared, the words falling with the weight of prophecy, we shall test the worthiest among us. The one who can play the talking drum of truth with a pure heart shall be named the royal drummer for life. The crowd erupted once more, a wave of joyful noise. But Okoro did not hear them. He heard only the pounding of his own jealous heart, a deafening drum that drowned out all else. The title, the glory, the eternal recognition, it should have been his. He would make it so. Later that night, as the cooking fires died down to embers, the elders gathered the people in a circle to hear the old story, the legend that was the bedrock of their kingdom. An elder named Bamadiel, his back bent like an old tree, but his voice still clear, began. Children of Arua, listen. The talking drum was not made by human hands. In a time of great silence, when the world was new and the rivers were dry, the ancestral spirits forged it. They took the heartwood of the first Irako tree, which stands between earth and sky, and they stretched over it the skin of the first rain, which holds the memory of all waters. The children listened, their eyes wide and reflecting the starlight. The drum, he explained, did not merely make sound, it spoke truth. It could summon rain from a cloudless sky, reveal a lie hidden in the deepest, darkest corner of a heart, and its rhythm could call the ancestors from their rest to dance among the living. But then Bamadiel's face grew stern, his finger pointing a solemn warning at every soul in the circle. But beware, his voice dropped to a whisper that demanded attention. All who approach with a selfish spirit. For if a lyre beats it, the drum will not sing. It will scream. It will speak their every shame, their every hidden sin, aloud for the world to hear. The villagers shuddered, a collective fear and respect filling the night air, thick as mist. But Okoro, listening from the outer darkness, away from the fire's glow, scoffed quietly into his cup. Superstition and fear, he muttered to himself, the drink warming his bitterness. It is a drum of wood and skin, a clever carving. It has no soul. It cannot judge me. Sleep was a treacherous sea for Okoro that night. When it finally claimed him, it pulled him down into a shadowed, vivid dream. He stood on a vast, endless plain under a sky full of watching, unblinking stars. In his hands, the talking drum glowed with a soft, captivating golden light, as if it contained a captured piece of the sun. He beat it, and the rhythm was powerful, primal. It shook the very earth and made the stars tremble. Kings from distant lands, draped in gold and jewels, bowed before him. The very spirits of the air, the forest, and the river knelt at his feet, their forms shimmering with ethereal light. He was the greatest drummer who had ever lived, the master of all sound. But then the beautiful glow of the drum turned hot, then searing. The The golden light twisted into a raging, hungry fire that crawled up his arms, consuming him. The drum melted in his grasp, becoming liquid flame that devoured his hands, the very instruments of his pride. The adoring faces of the kings and spirits twisted into grotesque masks of laughter and scorn, their cheers turning to mocking jeers. He woke with a strangled gasp, his body slick with cold sweat, his hands frantically clutching at the empty, dark air. The echo of the dream's agonizing fire still burned behind his eyes. The image of the drum, his to command, was seared into his mind. "It should have been mine," he whispered into the oppressive silence. The words no longer a thought, but a poisonous, binding vow. His gaze, desperate and determined, drifted toward his window, toward the dark, silent shape of the sacred hut where the drum was kept. The moon was a mere sliver, a claw scratch in the ink-black sky, offering no comfort and little light. Okoro moved like a ghost through the sleeping village, his feet finding familiar paths in the dark by memory alone. The sacred hut stood apart from the others, guarded not by men, but by ancient charms and the carved, wooden masks of the ancestors, which hung from the surrounding trees. Their hollow eyes seemed to track his every move as he approached. The air grew cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the night. He reached for the rope of twisted vines that held the door sealed, his own heart a frantic, panicked drum in his chest. A whisper rustled from the shadows, a voice that was not a voice, but something made of wind and memory and old, old magic. "Why do you come here, son of Ruwa?" it asked, the sound seeming to come from inside his own head. Okoro froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. But the envy in his heart was a warmer, stronger fire, a blaze that had been burning for years. He swallowed his terror and puffed out his chest. "I come to claim what I deserve," he declared, his voice trembling only slightly, betraying the fear he fought to master. As if in response to his audacity, the rope holding the door untied itself, slithering to the ground like a serpent. The wooden door, without a hand touching it, creaked open on its own, revealing only a deeper darkness within. The inside of the hut was a world apart. It smelled of old, sacred wood, dried herbs that tickled the nose, and something else, a feeling of immense, sleeping power. In the center, on a pedestal of woven reeds that seemed to pulse with a faint light, sat the talking drum. It was smaller, more humble than he had imagined, but it seemed to hum with a quiet, waiting energy like a sleeping beast. Okoro's hands trembled as he reached for it, his breath caught in his throat. The moment his fingers touched the smooth, unnaturally warm wood, a sudden wind swept through the enclosed hut, though there were no windows, no openings. It was a wind that carried a clear, sharp, and final warning. Do not awaken what you cannot silence. Greed, hot and hard, solidified in his heart. He ignored the voice, the wind, the fear. He clutched the drum to his chest, feeling its power seep into him. He turned and fled the hut, his prize secured. As he crossed the threshold, a sudden, silent fork of lightning split the sky. In its brief, terrifying illumination, he saw the ancestral masks lining the path. From their deep, wooden eyes, thick, dark tears of blood began to flow, tracing glistening paths down the carved cheeks. He ran, the drum held tight against him, into the covering, forgiving darkness. Far away, in the village, Tun stirred in his sleep, his peaceful dreams of rhythm and song shattered by a sudden, profound, and inexplicable sense of dread that clutched at his heart. He sat up, gasping, his soul aching as if a great, sacred wrong had just been committed in the world. Morning broke not with peace, but with a rising tide of panic. The priest had gone to make his dawn offering of fresh water and sweet herbs and found the sacred hut gaping open, empty. The news spread like a bushfire fanned by a fierce wind. The drum is gone. The spirit of sound has been stolen. The villagers gathered, their faces etched with a fear they had not known in generations. The old priest, his face a mask of grief and a fury born of deep devotion, stood before them, his body trembling. "A great curse falls upon us this day," he cried out, his voice cracking. "The one who has done this has spat in the face of our ancestors. He has broken the covenant between our world and the next. Disaster will follow this thief, and his shame will be our shared burden until the drum is returned." Warriors were summoned, their faces grim. They searched the ground around the hut, their eyes sharp. They found a set of footprints, clear and deep, leading away from the hut toward the Omi-Jetu, the river of spirits. The entire village held its breath as the trackers, the best in the land, followed the trail with grim determination. They tracked it to the very edge of the flowing water. And there, on the muddy bank, the footprints simply vanished. They did not lead into the water. They did not turn back. They stopped, as if the thief had been lifted from the earth or had simply dissolved into the air. The mystery was absolute, and the air grew thick and heavy with impending doom. 2 days' journey away, in a bustling riverland village that knew nothing of the theft, Okoro made his grand entrance. He walked into the central square with the swagger of a conquering hero, the sacred drum tucked possessively under his arm. "People of the Riverlands," he announced, his voice booming with a false confidence. "Rejoice! The ancestors have spoken. They have chosen me, Okoro of Arua, to be the new keeper of the talking drum." The people gathered, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and curiosity. He spun a glittering tale of a divine vision, of spirits leading him through the forest to the drum, of a celestial light that had crowned him. He promised them a spectacle unlike any other. "At your festival of voices tonight," he boasted, puffing out his chest, "I will play the drum. It will speak, and you will hear the very voices of your forefathers. You will see the true power the spirits have granted me, and me alone." The crowd murmured, excited and impressed by this charismatic stranger and his magical artifact. But as he finished his grand speech, a small child, a girl no more than 4, with eyes as clear and deep as a well, pointed a tiny, unwavering finger at him. In the sudden hush, her small voice carried with impossible clarity. "But the spirits are watching you," she whispered, her tone matter of fact. "They are always watching." A cold shiver, quickly suppressed, ran down Okoro's spine. Back in Arua, suspicion fell like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Okoro was missing. The drum was missing. The clues were as plain as the nose on one's face. Who else would have the knowledge, the skill, the audacity? The whispers began, cruel and sharp as thorns. Tund was his apprentice. He was like a son to him. He must have helped him. He knew the protective charms. He knew the secret paths through the forest. Despite Tund's tearful, heartfelt protests of innocence, the cloud of suspicion was too thick, the village's hurt too deep. The elders, their own heartsick and burning with anger, declared him an outcast until the truth could be uncovered. "Go," they said, their voices heavy with disappointment and sorrow. "And do not return until you can prove your heart is as clean as the morning dew." Exiled and utterly heartbroken, Tund wandered into the embrace of the great forest, tears of frustration and sadness streaming down his face. He had lost his master, his home, and the trust of his people. As he sank to his knees beneath the sheltering arms of a great, ancient baobab tree, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was an old woman, her skin like wrinkled leather, her eyes milky with age, yet they seemed to see straight into the core of him. "Do not weep, child," she said, her voice like the gentle rustling of 1,000 leaves. "Sometimes, innocence must journey through the valley of exile before it is believed by those who have chosen to blind themselves." She pressed a single white, perfectly formed cowrie shell into his palm. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with a gentle energy. "This will glow," she instructed, "when you are near the truth you seek. Follow its light." Alone in the borrowed hut at the edge of the Riverland village, Okoro prepared for his performance. His moment of glory was at hand. He took the talking drum, his hands eager and slick with sweat. He struck the first, experimental beat. Instead of a clear, resonant tone, a whisper slithered out from the drum skin. It was faint, sibilant, like a voice from a deep, dark well. "Thief, Okoro jerked his hands back as if burned. He shook his head, blaming the strange acoustics of the hut, his own frayed nerves. He steadied himself and tried again, a more complex, traditional rhythm of greeting. The whisper came again, louder this time, layered with other, fainter voices that seemed to argue and mourn. Liar, you are not worthy. Pretender. A cold, solid dread began to creep up his spine, tightening around his neck like a cold hand. Anger flared within him, hot and defensive. How dare it? He was Okoro. He was a master. He struck the drum harder, faster, pounding out a fierce, aggressive rhythm, trying to overpower the whispers, to dominate it, to force it to obey his will, to bend it to his glory. The drum skin vibrated violently under his furious, desperate hands. And then, from the intricate, spirit-carved symbols along the drum's wooden side, a dark, thick liquid began to seep. It was not water. It was red and viscous, like blood, and it stained his frantic, beating hands, marking him. He stared, his breath catching in his throat, his confidence fracturing into 1,000 shards of terror. The Festival of Voices was in full, chaotic swing. A vast, expectant crowd had gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering, dancing light of 100 torches, casting long, leaping shadows. The air was heavy, not with excitement anymore, but with a strange, waiting pressure as before storm. The stars were hidden behind a thick, oppressive blanket of cloud. Okoro walked to the center of the circle, the talking drum held before him like a shield. His hands were still stained a faint, rusty red, but he had washed his face of all fear, replacing it with a mask of grand, unshakable pride. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him, a physical pressure. He saw doubt in some, fervent hope in others, and in the eyes of the strange, old wise woman who stood at the very edge of the crowd, he saw a deep, profound, and knowing sorrow that unnerved him more than any doubt. He took a deep, shuddering breath, pushing the memory of the bleeding, whispering drum from his mind. This was his moment. He raised the carved stick. He brought it down upon the drum skin with all his might, with all the force of his ambition. The sound that erupted was not a musical note. It was a roar, a living, angry voice that shook the very ground beneath their feet and vibrated in their bones. And the first words it formed were clear, unambiguous, and terrible for all to hear. He stole me. A collective, sharp gasp, like a single entity, swept through the crowd. Okoro stood frozen, his arms still raised, his body rigid with shock. The drum spoke again, its voice now a chilling chorus of echoes, ancient and stern and utterly pitiless. Okoro of Arua came in the dark of the moon, when honest men slept. He entered the sacred hut not with reverence, but with greed burning in his heart like a fever. Okoro tried to let go, to drop the drum, to flee, but it seemed fused to his hands, a part of him now. He lied to his people. The drum continued, its rhythm becoming the slow, inexorable pounding of a judge's gavel pronouncing a sentence. He betrayed the trust of his loyal apprentice, Tund, and he carries a heavier, darker secret, one that stains his soul. The voice deepened, becoming a somber, funereal toll. 3 rains ago, the drummer Kofi, whose rhythm was as sweet as spring water, did not die of sudden fever. Okoro, jealous of his rising skill, gave him poisoned herbs in his palm wine. He silenced a rival to clear his own path to glory. The revelation was a physical blow to the crowd. People recoiled, hands flying to mouths. Okoro fell to his knees, a broken, guttural wail escaping his lips. The drum was not finished. Its final words were a simple, terrifying prophecy. The storm knows your name, Okoro. It comes for you now. As if the words themselves had woven the tempest into being, a deafening crack of thunder split the sky without a single preceding flash of lightning. A fierce, shrieking wind howled through the festival grounds, extinguishing half the torches at once and plunging the scene into a chaos of strobing shadows and terrified screams. In the sky above, the ghostly drummers from the legend reappeared, their forms translucent and shimmering, beating a complex, dissonant rhythm of shame and judgment. Their silent, furious music echoed the frantic, guilty pounding of Okoro's own heart. The crowd scattered, running blindly for shelter from this supernatural storm that targeted their very souls. Okoro, suddenly released from the drum's terrifying grip, scrambled to his feet. His moment of glory had become his eternal nightmare. He saw only a sea of accusing faces and heard only the echoes of his crimes screaming on the wind. Clutching the cursed drum to his chest, as if it now offered some twisted form of protection or belonging, he turned and fled, not seeing the path, only the desperate need to escape the devastating truth. He plunged headlong into the dark, wild, and waiting forest that bordered the village, the vengeful storm raging at his back like a pursuing beast. He ran until his lungs burned like fire and his legs threatened to buckle, finally stumbling to the slippery banks of a river he did not recognize. The water was black and unnaturally still, a mirror of the night. A desperate thought seized him. Perhaps he could cleanse it, wash away the curse, purify the drum and himself in the flowing water. He waded in, the cold water biting his skin like teeth. He plunged the drum beneath the black surface, scrubbing frantically at the bloodstains on the wood. But the water around the drum turned blacker still, like spreading ink, swallowing the light. A chorus of watery whispers bubbled up from the depths, voices gurgling and cold. You cannot wash off greed, son of Arua. It has stained your soul. It is a dye that no water can lift. He cried out in frustration and terror and threw the drum from him, hurling it far into the center of the river. He watched, panting, waiting for it to sink into oblivion. It did not. It floated, bobbing gently and mockingly on the dark, still water. Then, slowly, as if pushed by an unseen, deliberate hand, it drifted back toward him, coming to rest at his feet in the shallows, an unshakable burden. As he stared, utterly horrified, pairs of glowing, silver eyes opened just beneath the water surface, watching him, waiting for his next move. Tund, guided by the soft, steadily growing glow of the cowrie shell in his hand, had followed the trail of the unnatural storm. He found the wise woman waiting for him at the forest's edge, seemingly untouched by the howling wind. The drum seeks its keeper, she said, her voice impossibly calm amidst the chaos. It does not seek a perfect man, Tund. It seeks a true one. It answers to a heart that knows its own flaws, that has felt jealousy and anger, but chooses respect over pride, service over self. Only such humility can restore the balance that has been broken. She placed a cool, steadying hand on his forehead, and a sense of peace flowed into him. Do not fear the storm, for you walk with truth as your guide. Now go. The drum calls for you. It is tired of being used as a weapon. It yearns to be a vessel again. She gave him a small charm, a simple bracelet woven from dried, resilient vines. This will protect you from the storm's rage, but not from its judgment. No one could do that. Go. Tund took a deep, fortifying breath, his fear immense, but his purpose now a clear, bright flame within him. He turned and walked directly into the wall of wind and lashing rain, the charm on his wrist glowing with a soft, green light. He did not flinch as a bolt of lightning struck a great tree nearby, splintering it with a deafening crack. The forest had become a waking nightmare for Okoro. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal, grasping arms. Every shadow held a whispering condemnation. Murderer, thief, liar. He saw fleeting, horrifying visions. Kofi, his face pale and bloated, pointing a bony, accusing finger. The ancestral masks, their bloody tears still flowing freely. The disappointed, sorrowful face of his own mother, who had died believing in his goodness. He clutched his ears, but the voices were inside his head, echoing in the chambers of his own skull. Then came the laughter, a high, cruel, hysterical cackle that was a twisted echo of his own. It was his own voice, mocking him, replaying every boastful, arrogant word he had ever spoken to anyone who would listen. The very bark on the trees around him twisted and shifted, the patterns reforming into faces of stern judgment, their wooden eyes staring blankly, their mouths open in silent, eternal condemnation. He was trapped in a prison crafted from his own sins. He stumbled backward, falling over a gnarled root, and as he looked up, wiping the mud and tears from his eyes, he saw a figure approaching steadily through the twisted, malevolent trees. It was not a spirit. It was not a vision. It was Tund. His faithful apprentice had found him in the depths of his hell. Tund approached slowly, his hands held open and empty at his sides to show he meant no harm. His heart ached with a profound sorrow to see his once great master, a man he had revered, reduced to this trembling, wild-eyed creature, huddled and broken on the forest floor. "Master Okuro," he said, his voice gentle but firm, carrying over the howling wind that seemed to ignore them now in this clearing. "It is not too late. The spirits are merciful to those who truly repent. Please, I beg you, put the drum down. Let me help you return it. There may yet be forgiveness." Okuro looked at Tund, but his corrupted mind, poisoned by greed, shame, and fear, saw not compassion, but smug triumph in Tund's eyes. He snarled, his lips pulling back from his teeth, clutching the drum tighter like a mother would a child. "You," he spat, the word venomous. "You followed me. You want to take it for yourself. You have always been jealous. You want to steal the glory that is rightfully mine." The accusation was hollow, a perfect, bitter reflection of his own heart. In a final, desperate act of defiance, fueled by a fury that blinded him to all reason and hope, he raised his clenched fist and brought it down upon the drumskin with a raw, screaming cry. "It is mine!" The moment his fist connected, the world turned inside out. The talking drum erupted with a light that was both blindingly white and profoundly silent, a concussive shockwave of pure, elemental energy that threw both men apart as if they were dolls. Tund landed softly on a bed of damp moss, shielded by the charm on his wrist, which flared brightly in a final, protective act and then crumbled into harmless dust. Okuro was thrown backward against the trunk of a great tree, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs in a painful whoosh. The forest around them shimmered and changed. The trees shifted, their trunks groaning as they moved to form a great, perfect circle, their branches intertwining overhead to create a vast, natural cathedral, a courtroom for the spirits. The ghostly drummers from the sky now stood in a solemn ring around them, their forms more solid, their faces stern. The whispering voices of the wind, the river, and the very earth itself coalesced into a single, resonant chant that filled the clearing, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. One beats for pride, the voices intoned, a sound like grinding stones. One beats for truth. Let the rhythm decide. Let the heart's song be heard. The spirits of the forest, the air, and the water had convened their ancient court. Judgment, long awaited, was now at hand. The trial of echoes began. The talking drum, now hovering unsupported in the very center of the clearing between the two prostrate men, began to beat on its own. With each deep, resonant beat, a sound, a memory, an echo of a life, was pulled from the air and laid bare for all to witness. They were Okuro's sounds first. The whispered, late-night plots in his hut to discredit Tund. The boastful, elaborate lies he told the Riverland village. The faint, sickening crunch of the poison herbs being ground in his mortar, a sound he thought forgotten. Each sound was a lash against his soul, a scar reopened. Then, the drum's tone shifted, softened, became a gentler, more flowing rhythm. The sounds that emerged were Tund's. The patient, repetitive sound of him teaching a small child a simple, first beat. The soft rustle of him giving his own portion of yam to a hungry elder. The sound of his quiet, sincere prayers of thanks to the ancestors before each meal, his voice a steady hum of gratitude. The contrast was devastating, a symphony of selfishness set against a humble melody of service. The voices of the spirits spoke again, a single, thundering question that shook the leaves from the trees and made the ground tremble. Who shall hold the rhythm of truth? Who shall be the keeper of the heartbeat of Arua? The drum slowly drifted first toward Okoro. A wild, last spark of mad hope lit his eyes. Perhaps this was his final test, his chance to prove his worth. He lunged for it, his fingers outstretched, his whole being yearning to possess it, to command it one more time. But the moment his skin touched the warm wood, a searing, agonizing heat, exactly like the fire from his dream, engulfed his hand. He screamed, a raw sound of agony, snatching his blistered, smoking hand back to his chest, staring at the ruined flesh in horror. The drum then turned, its carved symbols now glowing softly, and floated toward Tund. It stopped before him, waiting, hovering at the level of his heart. Tund looked at the sacred instrument, then at his burned, weeping master, then at the assembled, impassive spirits. He felt the immense, terrifying weight of the moment, the responsibility that came with such power. His hands, the skilled hands of a drummer, trembled violently at his sides. He did not reach out. He made no move to take it. Instead, he bowed his head low, his voice a broken, honest whisper that carried through the silent clearing. I am not worthy of such power. It was the most truthful, uncalculated thing he had ever said. His words, this admission of unworthiness, hung in the air, a sacred offering. The judgmental chanting of the spirits ceased abruptly. The storm stilled its howling. From all around, the wise woman's voice echoed, not as a separate sound, but as a calm, clear thought in the mind of every being present, man and spirit alike. Humility, the voice said with ultimate finality, is the only worthiness the spirits recognize. Arrogance builds a wall between the soul and the sacred. Humility opens the gate. At Tund's honest confession, the talking drum began to beat on its own once more. But this rhythm was profoundly different. It was not one of anger or judgment or even peace. It was a rhythm of pure, vibrant, unstoppable life. It was the heartbeat of the forest, the pulse of the river, the whisper of growing things. The sound washed over the clearing, and where it touched, the scorched and torn ground began to sprout green shoots at an impossible speed. The spirits, stern and imposing, did not smile, for that was not their way, but they nodded in a deep, resonant, collective approval that was felt in the soul more than heard with the ear. The test was over. The true heart had been chosen. The drum beat one final, profound, world-shifting note. A wave of light, golden and warm and nurturing, flowed out from it in a perfect, expanding circle. It passed through Tund like a comforting, affirming breeze, filling him with a sense of rightness and calm purpose. But when the wave of light touched Okoro, he screamed, not a sound of physical pain, but of tearing, of a fundamental separation, a sound of the spirit being ripped asunder. A dark, smoky, viscous shadow was pulled from his form, a perfect, malevolent copy of himself that stood for a moment, looking back at him with his own face, but with empty, endlessly hungry eyes. This shadow, the very embodiment and sum total of his greed, his envy, and his pride, turned its back on him and walked away, fading into the deep shadows of the forest until it was completely gone, absorbed back into the darkness from which it came. Okoro collapsed, hollowed out, emptied. The raging fire of his envy was extinguished forever, leaving only cold, gray, lifeless ash in his soul. The moment the shadow vanished, the raging, supernatural storm that had besieged the forest and the kingdom simply stopped. An eerie, profound, and absolute silence fell, heavier than any sound. Above, the thick, oppressive blanket of clouds began to tear itself apart, unraveling to reveal the clean, bright face of the moon and the gentle, watching stars. The first rays of silvery light streamed down, illuminating the cleansed clearing. Then a soft, gentle pattering began on the broad leaves of the forest canopy. It was rain, a slow, steady, nurturing rain that fell on the parched earth of Arua and the riverlands alike. It was the first true, lasting rain in 7 long, desperate years of drought. In the villages, people stumbled from their huts, holding their hands out, their faces turned to the sky in joy, disbelief, and profound relief. The dry, cracked earth drank greedily. The rivers began to swell, their voices returning as a cheerful gurgle. The crops in the fields lifted their heads, their leaves turning from brown to green before the villagers' eyes. The land itself seemed to sigh, a great, shuddering breath of renewal. They rejoiced, singing and dancing in the downpour, not knowing the source of their blessing, only feeling in their bones that a great, cosmic wrong had been made right. And in the forest, Tund knelt in the softening, grateful earth, the warm rain washing his tears of release away as he gently, reverently, with clean hands and a cleaner heart, picked up the talking drum. The journey home was a silent, 3-day pilgrimage. Tund walked with a steady, purposeful pace, the drum held not as a trophy, but with the gentle respect of a keeper, cradled in the crook of his arm. When he finally emerged from the tree lean, the talking drum resting against his hip, the villagers of Arua saw him. They saw the gentle rain that fell around him, cleansing and blessing his path. They saw the profound peace and sorrow mingled on his face, and they understood. This was not a thief returning. This was a priest coming home. They did not cheer. They did not rush forward. Instead, a deep, collective reverence filled the air, and as he walked through the village toward the sacred hut, they knelt as he passed, their heads bowed not to him, but to the power he carried and the truth he represented. The old priest stepped forward, his own eyes full of tears of shame and joy. He looked from Tund's humble, steady posture to the drum, which seemed to glow with a soft, inner light of contentment. He raised his voice, old and cracking, but filled with new conviction, for all to hear. "The Spirit has chosen," he declared, his words final and absolute. "The drum has found its true keeper. The covenant is restored." At that exact moment, a gaunt, broken, barely recognizable figure stumbled from the tree line at the far edge of the village. It was Okoro. He was alive, but he was a shell, a ghost of his former self. And the final, terrible chapter of his punishment was not yet complete. The villagers watched, a complex mix of pity and horror in their hearts, as Okoro moved slowly, shuffling toward Tund. His mouth opened and closed, his face contorted with the immense, frantic effort of speech. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to curse his fate, to explain, to justify, but no sound came out. Not a whisper, not a sigh, not a rasp of air. His voice, the instrument of his boasts, his lies, and his commands, was gone, stolen as he had stolen the drum. The curse was complete and perfectly symmetrical. The man who had stolen the voice of the spirits to glorify himself had been robbed of his own earthly voice forever. The talking drum, still in Tund's arms, spoke one last time to Okoro, its voice now calm, firm, and final. "Let silence be your teacher, Okoro." In the quiet, may you finally hear the truth you spent a lifetime running from. May you learn its lessons well. The village watched in a mixture of awe and profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. There was no joy in his downfall, only the heavy, sobering, terrifying weight of divine justice. The price of greed had been paid in full, and the receipt was his eternal silence. The old priest, his hand trembling, gestured for Tund to play. The new, true royal drummer took his place before the people. He did not play a complex, showy rhythm or a loud, boastful tune to demonstrate his mastery. He closed his eyes, took a breath that was one with the rain-cleaned air, and played a simple, soft, steady beat, a rhythm like a mother's heartbeat, like the falling rain, like the very pulse of the earth. As the clean, pure sound flowed out, touching every heart, a final miracle unfolded. Across the entire sky, arching over the whole valley of Arua from end to end, a brilliant, breathtaking rainbow formed, its colors more vivid and alive than any had ever seen, a promise and a blessing painted against the retreating clouds. The drum's voice did not speak words of judgment now. It joined Tund's gentle rhythm, not as a master, but as a partner, a harmony of blessing, a song of renewal for the land, the people, and the future. And the storyteller's voice closes the tale, a gentle, lasting whisper on the wind. Remember, children of the earth, in every heart lies a drum. It beats to the rhythm of your choices. It sings the song of your character. May your rhythm be true, and may your drum never speak against you. For greed steals what only virtue can earn, and those who chase greatness without grace will one day dance to the rhythm of their own downfall.